Why is there such a huge gap between what we think parenting is going to be and what it actually is?
We end up thinking something's wrong with us instead of kind of understanding that it is hard and is messy, and actually a lot of meaning can come from that messiness.
Why, when we have children, do we think it's going to bring us closer together, but often it really pushes us apart?
The natural state of any relationship is not one of balance most of the time. It's one of dependency, right?
What are the jobs of mums and dads now? What's a dad when we're no longer just providers? What's a mum when they often are?
It's a mess. It's a mess. It's a maze. It's hard to navigate, but it's very helpful when we let go of this idea of like two independent beings relating to each other on equal terms with equal measure as an ideal in any relationship, because I just don't think it exists.
What am I supposed to teach or model for my children when I've no idea what the world is going to look like in 5 years' time?
A little more empathy, a little less certainty, a little bit more understanding and patience for neediness and the uglier stuff that comes out of human neediness.
Why did my parents seem to have loads of conviction about these things and I have absolutely none? In this podcast, I talk with experts from all around the world about these problems and hopefully get some wisdom, some insight, and maybe most importantly, some perspective, and find out what it takes to be a happier parent. Let's say your child is in trouble at school. Do you help them out, make excuses for them and reduce their suffering, or do you leave them to face the consequences of their actions in the hope that they will learn to do things differently next time? Parents wrestle with problems like this all the time, and Elissa Strauss's book, When You Care, The Unexpected Magic of Caring for Others, suggests that the philosophy of care and care ethics may help us navigate these situations. I've realized that I quote Elissa's work all the time, and I think it's because she has a way of making huge, difficult concepts intelligible. That doesn't change the fact that these are huge, difficult concepts, so this may not be my most accessible episode. We are not sweating the small stuff today, guys. We talk about the myth of independence and individualism and how our society is based on that myth. We talk about religion and the role it has had in perpetuating that myth. We talk about care ethics and how Elissa's view of dependence has changed her understanding of her marriage. It's a biggie. I hope you enjoy this episode. You start the second half of your book with a family member of yours who is a philosopher.
Yeah.
She would describe herself as a rationalist, and then she has a child with quite severe additional needs.
Yes.
And realizes that actually all the main streams of philosophy she's studying, they don't quite take her situation into account.
Yeah. So yeah, really my book, I mean, it was, it didn't have a big bang. It had kind of like different little origin myths or birth stories. But one of them was sitting next to a relative I didn't really know that well. She's married to my dad's cousin. They're not particularly close. Maybe I met her one other time my whole life. Maybe not. And but I'm sitting next to her at a wedding, and she is a philosopher of care. I had never heard of such a thing. I never really enjoyed philosophy because it was too rational. It was too hypothetical and rational for like the poetic, self that I had. And but she's talking about, she starts mentioning care philosophy. She starts talking about, using words like dependency, interdependence, relationships, relational ethics. And I'm just so intrigued because I don't even know what they all quite mean to me yet, but feel like there's something in this language that really might apply to this kind of ethical challenges and formation that happens when you become a parent. So I bought her books. I know I was like looking up every other term. Writing this book was a real crash course in philosophy for me. I never studied it. I didn't know all the references. I didn't know exactly what all the academic language meant, but I got there and it blew my mind. Like everything she said just blew my mind. Thinking particularly about just like the inevitability of dependency, making me realize that you have a person depending on you. You yourself are no longer independent. So it's not just that that person's dependent on you. that you now have a person depending on you. So you're not an independent, rational being so much
Sorry,
anymore.
when you care for another person, you're no longer independent.
I feel like that was like, it sounds so simple. It's like hiding in plain sight, right? As an epiphany. But I was like, whoa, yes. Because especially when you're like
We
first
think
time
of
parent,
loss of independence as in reliance. Now I need someone to look after me. But actually, you're
right.
right.
Exactly. And so we never really had language for that because we feel like there's something wrong with us when we become caregivers, parents, or other types of caregivers. Like we lose our independence and I feel like so much of the struggle of matrescence and patrescence is like reconciling that loss of independence, but without really having language or like a framework to realize like that's just part of it, right? Like that is part of the game. And actually, when you look at humanity that way, very few people are independent. I mean, really, no one is. But like even on some, in kind of some broader general sense, like the vast majority of humans right now on Earth either have someone dependent on them to survive and thrive, or are dependent on someone else to survive and hopefully thrive. Like that's just that's the natural state of things. And yet, almost all of our ideas about the good life, about what it means to think, about what it means to build a society and connect with others, rest on the myth of independence. And it's very academic and it goes deep, but once you kind of read the writings and you read other care ethicists, you realize like how all of our meaning-making systems, how all of our ideas of what a good government is, of what it means to be in community with each other, what it means to seek meaning and epiphany, are all bound up in this myth of independence. And it's like, it's just eye-opening. It kind of blows your mind when you realize how much we're all living in this lie. And living in that lie kind of hurts parents, whether we realize it or not, every single day that we parent.
So I'm just going to start with my most recent encounter with what you're talking about. I'm studying counseling at the moment. I think almost everyone will have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Mm-hmm. And when we look at that, we start at the bottom with food and then shelter and then a sense of safety and then esteem, and it goes up and up and up. But the pinnacle, initially, it's changed. We'll come on to transcendence when we talk about faith in a bit. But initially was self-actualization.
Right.
And this is the goal of masses of psychology, is this, I'm going to be better. I'm going to figure out me and my problems. But really, there's not really such a thing as my problems. But this is the lens that we all carry, right?
Right. I think we don't really self-actualize. We co-actualize in relationships with others. We communally actualize in relationship to the culture of our times, the history of our times, right? So even it's like self-actualization is a myth, but the 20th century was really uniquely like obsessed with the self, right? Everything was self. And, as a parallel to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have like the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell's work. And again, the hero is like a singular individual, right, who goes out on their own and slays the dragons. And like, it's just, again, it's so woven into our culture. It's woven into the Constitution and Declaration of Independence language in America of like what to seek liberty, seek happiness, not to seek community, not to seek care or be guaranteed care. Right? I mean, the word care is this most fundamental ingredient to human life. Like, truly, we don't exist without it. Is not in these like deeply inspirational founding documents of democratic governments around the world. And I was like, why?
Well, let's come back to why, because I'm really interested in the role patriarchy and men have to play in this kind of narrow view. Just to pick up there on those two examples, your one of Campbell and the hero's journey, which is about going out, leaving the home, going out to slay dragons and prove yourself, that necessarily involves this kind of leaving of community behind. Mm-hmm. I think there are some Jungians who'd be like, actually there's a bit of that story we always miss, which is the
Yeah.
return to the community as a change that just doesn't make it into the Hollywood feature film edit.
Right.
That bit's never
Right.
in there, but I think maybe it was initially. But then also, when you look at this definitions of a self-actualized person, one of the things that comes up is a self-actualized person is okay with solitude. They don't need to be surrounded by people all the time.
Right.
But as you point out, to anyone who's got kids, that's not an option.
Mm-mm.
Are you saying that I cannot be self-actualized with a family? And I feel this tug. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, so can I can't be like a full person with these people who make my life feel so full.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I'll speak very personally here. I did all the things to self-actualize in my 20s. I was like, a kind of typical, again, kind of poetic minded, like meaning seeking, young adult. And I, traveled around South America, hiked tall mountains, did meditation retreats in Thailand. I did it all. I took years off to travel and meaningful experiences. I'm not disparaging them. We're not a yes and friendly society, but this is a yes and, answer. But nothing was a mirror to the self, like raising my kids, like paled in comparison. Seeing myself through my interactions with my kids was the best mirror to self I've ever experienced in my life. It's not always pretty. I don't always like it. It's not always easy, but like real self-actualization involves friction, right? And relationships involve friction. Some of them, the friction is just bad and it's healthy to not be in that relationship. It doesn't mean every single friction-filled relationship is beneficial for us. But I think all real relationships, the ones that do help us discover really who we are, see our blind spots, maybe find a pathway towards beginning to define what might make our life meaningful, like all of that involves friction. Care involves friction. It's an inherent part of, what it means to care for someone. And that's 100% been for me, where like a much more self-actualizing process.
Let's talk about ethics, philosophy, ethics, they fit together. But you give an example, I think, of three sort of standpoints: a sort of a virtue-based ethics, a utilitarian-based ethics. What's the third one?
A deontological or kind of rules-based ethics.
Okay.
So
just take me through those.
Shorthand, right? If you do virtue ethics, like you're honest because you yourself like value honesty as a virtue. I am an honest person, therefore I don't lie. If you're following kind of a deontological or rules-based ethics, you have a sense that like being truthful is an important kind of part of a functional society. Like a society is best when we are truthful, and therefore you yourself won't lie. So it's not so much that like it's in you, where virtue ethics, the virtue's in you as an individual. And that's virtue is a little bit more kind of connected, right, to like a kind of theological or religious standpoint. Whereas, right, deontological is a little bit like this is what's best for society overall, and therefore I'm going to follow that rule because I agree to this kind of social pact. Utilitarian, or also called consequentialist ethics, is basically trying to maximize good. So when you're deciding whether or not to tell the truth, you will do a quick calculation of if you lie, how much harm will be done. If you tell the truth, how much harm will be done, or how much good will be done for, both options. And the one with the least harm / most good is the choice you make.
I'll just jump on the third one because I think it sounds so appealing to people, but there's massive flaws in it. Actually, if you look at it, ethics, if you look at like the most good in a situation where lots of people are enjoying torturing one person, if you did that calculation, you'd let them do it, right? So I just want to
exactly
pick a hole in that one because I think it's less obviously problematic. Anyway, sorry, go on.
No, and it's also very popular in Silicon Valley now, and you have this whole movement called effective altruism, which uses a utilitarian approach to determining it's focused on saving lives. And again, yes, and like I'm not going to knock people who are really taking deep interest and trying to really understand the best way to save the most lives. But when everything relies on data, you miss all the stuff that can't be collected into data that make life good, worth living, meaningful, also inspire goodness, right? You cannot collect data on, and maybe some have tried, but right, like encountering arts humanizes us and then brings you into your day to produce good in these really soft ways, right? That might not always show up on a chart as having saved a life. So I think that's also, it's like you can't account for everything. You can't measure everything. So, okay, care ethics. Care ethics came in, and the big idea is that, hey, like we can have these different ways to kind of navigate ethical situations. And one of the ways should be considering like the relationship we're in. That's like one person right in front of us. What's the context we're in? Who is this person? And I'm going to take that into consideration when I decide whether or not to be honest about something. And as a quick example in my book, I said maybe a parent, you don't generally want your child to cheat on homework. You don't do your child's homework for them ever, really, right? Like this is an important value for you. Maybe it's a virtue. It's like who you are. You also don't believe that it's good for a school system if ever all the parents are doing the work all the time. Like that would just, like that, it is not good for the good. You could even throw in utilitarianism in there. Like the net effect for your child would also ultimately be bad if you're doing their homework, okay? But in care ethics, maybe you do, if your child was bullied all day at school or all week at school and has to turn in a paper on Friday and they're just emotionally distraught, maybe that one time you help your child a little bit more than you would, because in the context of this one and only relationship right here and now, it actually does feel right to help your child. And, relational ethics, care ethics, it's very process oriented. It's less outcome based, and it's very situational. And it's not a neat, it's kind of the polar opposite of, right, this neat and tidy utilitarian approach where we can just measure everything. Like you're not measuring anything in care ethics. It takes a moral and emotional intuition, which, right, a lot of philosophers don't always like. They don't like letting emotions in the room. But the reality is our emotions and our moral intuition are like intricately bound up. So much of our sense of what's right or wrong and being good people comes from an emotional place. So care ethics is a very messy moral philosophy, but for me was really eye-opening and helped me wrestle with these really hard, bigger questions of why I give my kids so much more than other kids, particularly needier kids.
Before we go big,
yes,
I want to stick with that example of the homework, because I think it's really interesting that I think it's Carol Gilligan you're quoting suggests that actually women have a kind of more naturally subscribe to this kind of ethical view of the world, whereas men have been more likely to take a kind of a virtue response or see it as a kind of external thing where it's like,
right,
no, this is what good is, I'm going to live by it.
Right.
And that exact example of the homework thing has definitely panned out in that gendered way in our home, where I've been like, no, we're not going to do that because that's not right. We want to teach him what is right so that next time he will do the right thing. Whereas my wife has been like, he's having a rough time at the moment. Exactly what you said, put the relationship as paramount. And I guess just not be as enthralled or controlled by this external sense of good.
Right. And you got to mix it all together. It's not, I don't think any care ethics is like, we're the best, we're the number one, only use care ethics when deciding what to do. But there should be some part of ethical equations should involve like preserving and strengthening the relationship, right? This one-on-one relationship and delivering care, right? Like this should be an important part of our ethical reasoning. And that's what the care ethicist really brought to the table. Like it's not wrong to consider the individual and consider the circumstances and consider the emotional state of the individual when deciding what to do. And it doesn't mean it's always right or always wrong to help the kid with the homework. It just means like you're going to be in that again. That they use the words process oriented. It's ongoing. It's not. It's less outcome based, and it's more the exchange and the connection. It's tricky stuff. It's not neat and tidy. But as a parent that struggles, like to figure out what's right and wrong, I mean, like we all do on a daily basis in a way with our kids. It's like valuing the kid versus valuing the world at large, honoring the kid's particular circumstances that day with a bigger idea of how you want the kid to grow. Like it's a tug of war every single day. And it's just really nice to have this ethical principle in your pocket that tells you it's okay to think about the relationship too. It's okay to think about the care piece too. And ultimately, people who are cared well for end up being, right, like more functional citizens in the long run. Like it's not a net loss, even if we take it kind of to the data place. Like we know that having good, attentive care in your youth.
I mean, the people being cared for, certainly. But then also, I think, what your whole book is about, having this as your ethical benchmark, this relationship. What am I doing for this relationship in this moment? It's constantly drawing us into true empathy, where it's not like I'm looking at this I'm not in your shoes. I'm looking at through your eyes. I'm trying to be you when I look at this. Which you said to me before, it's just a constant struggle and joy and reward of parenthood is this kind of constantly drawing us out of ourselves into other. And I think that, if I hadn't listened to people like you, then I wouldn't be constantly in this position where I'm doing that. Do you know what I mean? And I'm trying to reframe situations and it just becomes this amazing a tool for life.
Yeah. And it's, I feel like and because of the patriarchy, which we mentioned before, we've kind of minimized, and this is a lot of what Carol Gilligan's book is about. Like we've minimized this kind of ethical reckoning, and we make it sound like, women are just so loving and caring, and it's so easy, and it's always just about love, and they don't think too hard about it. But it's actually a deeply intellectual process. Even if emotions are involved, it doesn't mean the intellect's totally pushed out of the way. And in fact, trying to marry like your emotions and your intellect is some top-notch work. It's so hard, it's some of the more difficult things you'll do. So, I think what Carol Gilligan, where her work came from.
Sorry. I think she's responding, right, to a man who basically said there's kind of 7 stages of morality and women only ever get to level 3 or something. Can you just explain that?
Yeah, exactly. Like Lawrence Kohlberg, who I think mentored her at Harvard and did all of his study on the moral evolution of humans on men, on boys. Like he didn't study, women or girls at all. And they came to these conclusions, right? And the results were quite sexist. And I think, Carol Gilligan said, hey, wait a minute, like, let's see what happens when we study girls. And she did a study on a young woman and found that they have a different kind of moral reckoning. And Carol Gilligan's always been very insistent that she doesn't think we're born this way. She thinks this is a product of acculturation. She told me on the phone, she's like, my book's called In a Different Voice, not in a woman's voice. And she's really try to keep insisting on that over the years. I think a lot of people ran with it, that women are X and men are Y. And we see that a lot right now in the States and the political discourse. So it never goes away. And I'll say, I feel like I'm raising 2 young boys that I feel like understand care ethics intuitively. It's an example of one over here, but it's possible. But yeah, so Carol Gilligan, I think that's really what she tried to show in her book. Like this isn't just softy, silly woman just giving in and loving everyone. It's its own process. It is its own really challenging trajectory to arrive at what you feel like is the right decision when you take the human right in front of you into consideration and your feelings about that human and the needs of that human into consideration.
And one of the reasons that this thinking hasn't potentially entered into kind of earlier philosophical thoughts, which are usually born of religions, is that we have this kind of assumption of maleness in religion. And there's something you talk about where it's like, okay, yes, we'll find a way to praise women for the care they can do so that men can go off and take care of the really important
Right.
business of religion, which is either scholastic or solitary or kind of
Yeah.
self-actualizing, but it involves kind of awareness.
Yeah. It's like in one way or the other, there's a real care blindness in most. I think Hinduism is an exception. It's a trickier one in this way, but certainly Christianity and Judaism and Buddhism, I think, and then also Islam and Hinduism to a degree, all have a care blindness in them. And I think, if you think of monastic traditions, it's just written right into the script, right? That like in order to experience spiritual enlightenment, you have to be removed in some way from dependency relationships. You have to be removed. A vow of celibacy, it's just kind of, it's quite explicit, right? Like having children and family life will distract you from a deeper relationship with God. And of course, there are lots of different types of Christianity, and there's also care and community values in both Buddhism and Christianity. We could talk about this for days. And
since when you say it like that, I'm like, I can't remember who came up with this expression that, in our culture, work exiles men from the home. But actually, before that, religion exiled us from the home. It wasn't like a valuable, but it's never been seen really as a valuable place. It's kind of to be respected and honored, but yet a distraction from.
At a distance, exactly. And so in Judaism, you don't have, you have babies. You have lots of babies. There's never been a vow of celibacy.
I feel like Judaism must do better than the other ones. I always think of it as the socialist religion, right? It's kind of
so community is very important in Judaism. Like that's very real. And it's, Judaism is a religion much more of this life versus the afterlife. That's the focus. There's some afterlife thought in Jewish texts, but it's really a minor thread. And you have babies. You're supposed to have lots of babies. And so much of the practice takes place in the home. So Friday night Shabbat dinner, very central to Jewish life. It's the holiest of holies. Actually, the thing we do every week is like the most important thing in a way. Takes place at the family dining room table. So there's a lot that happens in the home. That's big deal in Judaism. But the real meaning making took place in the houses of study, and women were not welcome there. And today, it's no longer that men will leave their families for, years and years to go study in a traditional Jewish house of study, yeshiva, but they will kind of leave their home. They will leave most of the care work to their wives. And I write about this in the book, and to me, it's like really illustrated and hit on the head that every Friday night, there's a song sung. It's a psalm, Woman of Valor. It's sung to the wife of the house, the woman of the house. It praises this like very industrious woman. She's not just a homemaker and a caretaker. She works. She does everything. She's like superwoman. She's having it all. She's probably exhausted. And you sing this. So you're praising this work. It's not invisible labor, but it's like record screech moment. In traditional homes, like the women are not allowed to sing. They're not allowed to sing their song that's for them. They're not allowed to sing. And I don't know.
Isn't she amazing? Shh, not you, love.
Exactly. Like we sing to you how amazing you are, but we can't hear your voice sing because we might get I think this is the reason we might get turned on by you and all your, devilish charm when you just sing that you're not allowed to sing. So that's it right there. It's like, and again, of course, also like in the kind of Judaism I practice, women could be rabbis and spiritual leaders and many other denominations. But in the most traditional ones, women cannot lead. And so to me, like, how can you say you really value care if the people that have the most kind of both embodied and kind of intellectual and emotional knowledge of care aren't welcome to be leaders of your community? So it's the patriarchy. Judaism is deeply patriarchal. Lots of Jews are progressive. We like to not see it that way. And we hinted at this already, but I think we both believe this, say it directly, like patriarchal cultures just value care less. You cannot do both.
And I think, one of the things I quote you on quite often is, the thing you say in your book which is, when patriarchy has this assumption of maleness, and that's really damaging to men because we miss out on all the particulars of masculinity. And actually, it's only when we kind of have those conversations that it's like, that's awful for men.
Yeah.
being told that, actually your true calling is kind of away from this place, and
Yeah.
it's solitary, and it's a lonely kind of journey that you have to go on to be a
Right.
good man.
And I mean, we both benefit from both so much. It's like women benefit from not just being tethered to the house, and men benefit from being tethered to the house. Like, and there's just so truly good and bad in both places. There's so much to learn in both kind of environments and lifestyles and life choices and whatnot, that it's again more yes and, but it's not about privileging one versus the other, or saying there's nothing to going on that long solo hike or the Buddhist silent meditation retreat. It's just, can we fit care into our story of what makes life meaningful, what makes a person interesting, what brings wisdom?
Because I also think we're all massively affected by a Judeo-Christian view of the world. We're all massively affected by Descartes' "I think, therefore I am," the sort of separation of the mind from the body, and approaching the world in viewpoints that hold self as primary.
Yeah. You just think of like your boundaries of self, and right. I mean, care, like in such physical terms, care challenges the boundaries of self. Like, especially when you're little and they're just, women get touched out. It's like this idea that your body is separate from other bodies, particularly for people who get pregnant and carry babies and deliver them. Like, that kind of goes away a little bit. But then if you take it to like this wooier, more spiritual place, it's like, it's just so real. It's so vulnerable. We don't really have a cultural appreciation for it. So I feel like a lot of us, when we're in it, we feel like there's something wrong with us. And then we pathologize it instead of seeing it as, again, this more like productive friction, not deteriorating.
Just explain
friction.
that. You think we feel we're wrong because either we're not loving it or because we have. Just explain that.
I think it's like the challenges of care are often internalized as something's wrong with us, right? It's like, it's because we have this expectation. We don't see care as like a place of production friction. We might have this idea that care is supposed to be really easy and natural. And when it's not, or we're not feeling it, or when our kids are tricky, like there's something wrong with us or something wrong with them, and not just that. And sometimes that is true, right? But often it's just care's hard. It's like being in relationships with other humans is hard. Showing up for other people's hard. And I think what happens a lot is like we end up thinking something's wrong with us and kind of going with that narrative that there's something wrong with us or wrong with this scenario, instead of kind of understanding that it is hard and is messy. And actually a lot of meaning can come from that messiness. And it could be, if we're in the spiritual realm, I think a lot of spiritual growth can come from that messiness. I actually think it's almost the easiest to talk about with like people who, dabble in God a little bit, because I think, so, to get nerdy and Jewish for a second, like the name Israel means to wrestle with God. There's the story of Jacob in the Hebrew Bible. He's sleeping on a rock, and then he suddenly wrestles with this very strange figure. Like, is he wrestling with himself? Is he wrestling with an angel? Is he wrestling with God? Is an actual man wrestling him? Like, no one knows, but he spends a whole night wrestling. Morning passes. He asked this angel man self, it's very Freudian in way, gives him, then renames him, and names are a big deal in the Bible, and names him like Israel, like he who struggles with God. And that's, I feel like that is the birthright of the Jewish faith tradition, and in a way then the Christian faith tradition, because it's of course built on top of the Jewish faith tradition. And if we can take a little bit of that into our relationship with our kids, it creates a very different frame to the wrestling. Like if Jews are God wrestlers, and if you take that and you kind of use that as a frame on parenting, then it kind of opens up possibilities of how you view the friction and struggles and the growing pains of becoming a parent and being a parent, from something where something's wrong with you because you don't look like a 1950s sitcom, to being engaged in like a really rich process. That's my sermon for the day.
That was very well done. It was captivating, and I read that's we're supposed to be wrestling. relationships are hard, relationship with children, but then the transcendental, whatever, it's all a wrestle. And then
Wrestle, man.
you also mentioned in your book the story of Abraham and Isaac, which just really, it's just really funny to me, because I realized that my kids have grown up with absolutely zero religion, which, you know, I'm fine with. But what I do think is quite, I feel I maybe have let them down, is that we all still teach Shakespeare in schools because it's the foundation of so much of the English language, and, you know, it's got all the stories in there. But actually, you know, if you want English literature reference points and you don't know anything about the Bible, you're gonna come unstuck really quickly. So I decided,
Also,
right,
where do you think Shakespeare got a lot of his
right,
plot lines,
exactly.
too? You know, I mean, which is fine. It's yeah.
And then I started with the Old Testament, and I got very quickly to Isaac, where he says, you know, God says, like, yeah, go and kill your son, and he's like, okay, and the kids go, what? And I'm like, so then, you know, the way it sort of has always come out to me is like, and then at the last minute, God's like, I'm just joking. I thought you were going to do it though, but so, you know, you proved it. And it's quite like, it was really horrific to their ears. They're like, what? But you had a really interesting take on that.
So Abraham's like the first Jew. First, Abraham has a child with his handmaiden, Hagar, and that child's Ishmael, and that's where Islam comes from. It's like this myth contains so much, and we're still living underneath it, whether we know it or not, like the division between Islam and Judaism, everything. So finally, Sarah has a child of her own. There's going to be like a Jewish future, basically, as promised by God to Abraham. And then, weird plot twist, God asked Abraham to sacrifice this child they longed for so much, this child that God sent 3 angels to Abraham's tent to announce that Sarah would have this child. Like, everything's building towards this child. And then, plot twist, God's like, oh, actually sacrifice this child. It's completely weird. It's completely uncomfortable. So Abraham doesn't tell Isaac, goes up the hill, says, you know, Isaac's like, why do you have all this like stuff to sacrifice or kill someone? And Abraham's like, don't worry, kid. And they go up this hill, and Isaac is bound. Abraham, you know, knife right here. And then angel comes and says, like, oh, actually, don't do it. And it's a totally horrifying story. The Bible's filled with horrifying stories. I think this is a little bit because Jesus was really wonderful and good.
Yeah. The Old Testament's savage in comparison, right?
Yeah, and it's humanity. It's not. There's no I run a Jewish fellowship for artists, and I sometimes have to tell people, I'm like, we don't have Buddhas or Jesus. Like, these people are all messy human. Like, you're not supposed to live like any of them. You're supposed to learn from the stories and see the humanity in them and yourself. Like, this isn't the art model. So Abraham, to me, like, one of the lessons in that, and it's also a lesson in the 10 Commandments, is like, your relationship to God matters, but also your relationships to others matter too. And God also, you can see God as a character who grows through the Hebrew Bible. So God's not all set at the beginning. God is constantly doubting God's self. God is making changes. God like paints the canvas white again with the Noah story, and then starts drawing again, you know, erases all of creation.
Right.
God's
so
a hot mess too.
He's quite kind of like human.
In the Hebrew Bible, like, the God character is very human and as broken and confused as the rest of us, you know? And it's like humans come into their selves as like the Israelites, the Jewish people. God is coming into God's self too in this like God character in the Hebrew Bible. So God, I think, I think it's like one. I think if you really are a close reader of the Hebrew Bible, you realize that like none of these are like morality tales telling you this is the right way to live. Like, there's no reason to believe you're supposed to understand that God was making all the best decisions in that moment, or Abraham. You have just, again, these kind of 2 messy characters making these kind of trying to stumble their way into this relationship they have. And to me, one takeaway from that is them both realizing like, wait, no. We cannot build a religion in which, like, we have to sacrifice everything for God. We have to build an idea of religion in which, like, relationships between humans matter too. And I think God realizes it before Abraham. God tells Abraham to stop, and sacrifice will be part of it. Human sacrifice cannot be part of it. And human sacrifice was something that happened right at that time in the world. So there is actually a historical edge to it. And this is what I think we should take away from this like really weird, awful story, is that we have these two beings, the God character and the Abraham character, stumbling in to what it means to be to be monotheistic, to believe that like there's one God and we're all created in that one God's image. So therefore there's like oneness in the world. And what does the relationship between a single human and that one God look like? It can't just be about the God and the human. It also has to involve care relationships. It also involves caring for our children in that, in the particular case of this story.
I love it. That's wonderful.
I feel like I'm like my rabbi self is on. I'm not a rabbi.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know
like,
if anyone apart from me is going to be interested in this.
I think as much as all this stuff sounds like so far from so many people's lives, particularly kind of secular, progressive, intellectual types, like all of this undergirds our whole culture. Like we are all built on top of all these major world religions. They're like, you may have never thought for a second about Abraham and Isaac or any of this stuff, but like, the world did. Your entire society and culture did. These stories are like woven in such invisible ways to all of our institutions, all of our cultural understandings, all of our ideas about the good life and what makes a person interesting and what makes work important.
You tie your book up in a really interesting way, which is basically looking at your marriage and thinking about how you viewed your marriage and what it was going to be like in this, I'm going to look after you, but you're going to look after me. And I imagine the scorecard on that is going to be fairly equal.
Yeah.
Tell me what's changed.
Yeah. And I mean, and still, back to this ongoing, all these words I've used, like ongoing, process-oriented, relational. So I think, through my relationship with my kids, it kind of readjusted my expectations for my relationships with everyone else in my life. From like the person who is looking at their phone at the stoplight when I'm in a rush, all the way to my husband, the person I'm probably most intimate with, and by seeing all these relationships through the lens of dependency, like it created, for the guy looking at his phone at the stoplight when I'm in a rush, like just a little more empathy, a little more pause, a little, reminder that like, I know how flawed and imperfect humans are because I'm navigating my children's flaws and imperfections and trying to do my best to shape them, kind of shape them in a way where we reduce them and minimize them so they can be good humans in the world at large, and also navigating my own flaws and imperfections that I witness in myself while raising these little kids. And so that creates a little more empathy, a little less certainty that I'm always right as I navigate the world at large, a little bit more understanding and patience for neediness and the uglier stuff that comes out of human neediness. Because, there's like this kind of pure idea of neediness where people are just kind of like vulnerable and sweet and need a little help. But also a lot of people that are needy get prickly and tricky. So, there's kind of this larger halo effect of investing in dependency. And it doesn't mean I'm always this like perfect, great person, but I think it's expanded me in productive ways. And then there's like a really particular effect of changing how I think about my marriage. And I think marriage is a really long relationship. So I think what it really brought, helped me see in my relationship with my husband, it's basically feel a little less resentful when I feel like things are imbalanced. And I know there's so much to say because there's all this feminist conversation about divorce right now and women's needs not being met in marriage. And that's all very real.
We don't want to go around being like divorce is a bad thing. And yes, we have needs that maybe we could say should be met. Right. But
yeah,
what are you saying here?
Right. But listen, like the natural state of any relationship is not one of balance most of the time. It's one of dependency, right? It's like, it's very rare, maybe it's a better way to put it, to have the seesaw be like perfectly straight. The seesaw looks like this, and it looks like this in caregiving relationships. And in marriage, and then, but I thought maybe in marriage, I guess people are listening. So I'm making a seesaw shape with my hands, right? And we know that it's at an angle, right? And seesaw is
she was doing a variety of extremities of angle, guys.
Exactly. We know the seesaw is never straight, really, in a parenting, a caregiving relationship, right? Like someone's on top, the parent's holding it down while the kid's lifting up. But I think with marriage, I thought maybe the seesaw would be a little straight more often, right? Like it would feel kind of a little bit like the give and take would be kind of in constant churn, right? It's like a ping pong game. It's the bump, bump, bunk, bump, bunk, bump, bunk. A really good ping pong game, not me playing, but really capable ping pong players, ting tong, ting tong, ting tong, back and forth. And it turns out like marriage is not like that. And I think my kind of openness to my marriage expanded a lot, and my patience with my marriage, that's as perfect and perfect, I think, as most marriages. I became more open to the whole process of what I think this whole marriage thing actually is when I kind of took my understanding of dependency that I gained through my kids and put it on top of my marriage.
Okay. So I think what's tricky about that, and you're absolutely right, as you said in your book, I think you said that actually at no point are any of my relationships symmetrical.
Yeah.
And I wonder if, I think humans have such a big animal reaction to injustice that when that seesaw is really out of whack, that is when we can be enormously hurt with the other person.
Yeah.
But I think, so rather than it just being an acceptance that that's going to happen, where I got to is that actually the perception of that being out of balance matters a lot more than it being out of balance. So this is kind of like proven through various studies that if I think Eloise and I'm doing 40% and she's doing 60, and we both agree that's what's going on, that's absolutely fine. Actually, if I think we're level, but she knows we're 40-60, then we've got problems.
Yeah.
So it's actually, I love what you're saying about being comfortable with neediness, because it's so anathema to kind of, particularly what men are taught is kind of like sexy and attractive, But actually at times, like, it's the beauty of relationship. It's like I need you right now. One of us needs the other one more than the other way around. But I think what has to happen for that to not be abuse or not cause resentment is an acknowledgement that that is what's going on.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's right when we see marriage as in the context of dependency relationship, it doesn't mean suddenly then it's totally okay if one person's always giving and one person's receiving. It doesn't mean we have to accept anything because it'll never be even, and how silly of us for expect it to be so. What it means is that when we take a step back and look at it, we see it within the context of dependency, and it allows us to navigate the truth of it, or let's say we're never going to navigate the truth of it, but maybe get a little closer to the truth of it, we're never going to get all the way there. And so it's just taking a different perspective of what it should look like and seeing your needs within that context. And I also want to separate out, because I think a lot of the contemporary discourse about marriage really focuses on domestic labor, who's doing what for the kids, the kind of mental load, the invisible load. That's all a huge part of marriage, but that's kind of the co-parenting, co-householding piece of marriage. There's also the emotional relationship between two adults. And I've noted a lot lately that that really gets left out of this kind of co-parenting, co-householding. Do they interact and intersect? Of course, but they're not the same. So I think when we think about kind of, the practical piece versus the emotional piece, I think the practical piece, it's kind of much easier to try to maybe get the seesaw balance. Like we have so much good work, so much good discussion, your work, like all of the fair play stuff, and so much else going on where we're kind of paying attention to the seesaw in terms of the co-householding and co-caregiving piece. But that's only a part of marriage, right? The other part is like just the relationship between the two of you. This like, are you feeling cared for as an individual by your spouse? Not, are you guys, there's only one person planning all the birthday parties? Like, are you guys sharing the caregiving for your kids? You know, again, we have a lot of the conversation focuses on this kind of output for the kid's sake or the household's sake, who's taking the trash, doing the dishes, blah, blah, blah. Less about like what's this kind of current going back and forth between husband and wife. And so for me, like thinking about my marriage in that dependency context, I'm really talking about in that current that just exists between husband and wife that's separate from all that, the kind of household production and care production stuff.
In this sort of, are you saying, are you thinking about me? Like,
yeah.
Are you thinking about how this is going to feel for me? And are
Yeah.
you? And I think the reason those things are really quite stuck together, I'm struggling in my mind to separate those out.
They are absolutely stuck together, but I think they're not the same thing. That's all,
Because I think that in a kind of, post-industrial revolution kind of household, that kind of woman being the kind of goddess of the home was how she kind of cared. And then I think that man going out to work has always been, it just feels so much less direct. It's always been that imbalance. It's like, yes, I'm going out to earn money for my family, but that is not what you're thinking about whilst you're doing it. Whereas when you're cooking food for a bunch of people, that is where your mind is. There is this kind of imbalance.
But I think both of those examples, I think, are more about the household overall and less about the relationship with each other. I just want to insert that into the mix.
Give me an example of what you're talking about. Give me an example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think in like plain terms, you can have a spouse that is great at sharing all the work, is an active co-parent, does the dishes, makes play dates. This is clear. I'm talking about a male spouse, right? Because we'll assume women do all this stuff. Right. You can have a husband.
What a legend.
Yes. That does all of this, but it doesn't mean that there's attunement to the wife, right?
Yeah,
it doesn't mean they're attuned to the household needs. They're attuned to the care needs. But what does it look like? What does their attunement to their spouse look like? The spouse's inner life, because we may be caregivers, but we have these rich inner lives that transcend care responsibilities, right? And so I think for me, it's that piece of it. Like, what is the give and take of that looking like? Are we giving and sharing equally? Are we taking turns? Is there a somewhat natural imbalance in some ways in one way, but in the other, a natural imbalance in like some ways in the other way, where sometimes, do we speak different care languages? And navigating through that, I think it's been clarifying. Doesn't mean it's easier, but clarifying to kind of understand that it's hard for all that relationship to really feel balanced, that we are dependent on each other when we're married on each other, not just in practical ways, in these kind of deep psychological ways.
Yes, which can be, and there's beauty in that.
It's so vulnerable.
It's instant, as soon as you say like that word dependent, we're going right back to the beginning. I'm like, but we shouldn't be. Do you know what I mean? We should be able to self-actualize, but it's just not, that's not right. We're missing it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I do not have a whole book to write on what this means in marriage, because when I left the book in that place, it was really like, these are things I'm thinking about. And I can't say I've figured it all out in the context of marriage. And I have 10 lessons to share with anyone about how to use that insight to improve their lives. I'll let you know, everyone, when I do. But I think it's a really useful way to view lots of relationships. I think friendships too, I mean, I'm kind of like, I'm a competent person type, I'm like the organizer. I always have been since, university days, like the one that kind of planned everything, figured out. If you traveled with me, I was the one. Maybe I'm bossy too. It's entirely possible. I'll own it. But I'm just, I just have like a mind that's well suited to organizing, like process, that it's just some people like this stuff more than others. I can plan a party in 7 minutes kind of person. And, So I think it's like I've been the giver type, and you know, as you get older, you see imbalances in friendships, and you have to kind of see, like, instead of trying to keep score or trying to see like who's giving what, you have to see like who's dependent in one ways and who's dependent in other ways, who's kind of providing care in some ways and who's providing care in other ways.
What does the relationship need?
Well, yeah, exactly. And so I think it's really stark in friendships. I think like we show up in marriage, I think expecting a little more tit for tat. Like, I give this to you, why can't you give it to me? I think we're a little more forgiving in friendships. Like, you're going to give X and I can give Y, and we are who we are. And it's not like it's like, in some ways, if we look at the relationship through this lens, the seesaw's going in this direction. If we look at the relationship in this lens, the seesaw's going in this direction. So I think the dependency lens might be more intuitive and useful for friendships first, or maybe adult sibling relationships, where if you don't just think about like, oh, I'm giving this and I'm not getting it in return, that could, you know, or if you only think about I'm giving this and not getting it in return, you can hit a wall and feel really frustrated. But if you can move back and be like, all right, they're dependent on me in this way. In what ways am I dependent on them? It could prove really insightful and might actually make you realize that the friendships you have that you were feeling a little bit were lopsided are less lopsided than you think. Now, again, we bring that to marriage, which I think we do expect a bit more tit for tat, you know, and we should. And I think women are often the ones that feel like they're not getting enough. So I really don't want to like ignore that gendered piece of it. I relate to that gendered piece of it. I am married to an American man who was raised with all the toxic messages about individualism and don't be vulnerable. So I get it. But I think it just helps for me to not just focus on, not expect equality and then jump to what's lopsided in a way that's not in my favor, and to like kind of zoom out a little bit and see the dependency piece and see how it's lopsided in my favor in some ways, or try to find those places. It's a mess. It's a mess. It's a maze. It's hard to navigate, but it's very helpful when we kind of let go of this idea of like two independent beings relating to each other on equal terms with equal measure as an ideal in any relationship, because I just don't think it exists.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation. If you did, check out my other episode with Elissa, episode 8, The Magic of Caregiving. Elissa Strauss's book is When You Care, The Unexpected Magic of Caregiving for Others, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. Elissa is very active on Substack, and her channel is called Made with Care. Please like and subscribe to the podcast and leave me a review. Check out my Instagram at Be a Happier Parent, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.